Yeah.
But deductive weren't. So I was trying to get back on deductive. Is it also observing or not?
Okay, so that's some question. What's the difference between inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning? So in inductive reasoning, we have talked about the observation. How does deductive reasoning differ from inductive reasoning? Yes, sir.
Okay, I think deductive reasoning, the premise is agree with the conclusion, not fully say before you reach the conclusion. So the premise must agree with what of the conclusion.
Okay, we are moving close. Finish what he should have finished. He has started well, but he has not really completed the story. She is not still satisfied. Oh, you didn't capture what he said? Oh, you didn't come last week? Okay. Madam, can you add value to what he has said? Okay. What he has said is correct. In deductive reasoning, you are using facts. And those facts must be logically connected for you to logically come up with a conclusion. The problem with the facts is that you must have a source of those facts. In other words, you must know to come up with facts. You cannot come up with a fact unless you know, isn't it? Now the question is, what is the source of that knowledge giving you those facts? If those facts are correct, you are going to come up with a correct conclusion. But how do we know that those facts you have started with are correct? Unless you are very sure of where those facts are coming from. And that you are very sure that wherever they are coming from, they are correct facts. Then your conclusion is going to be correct. Okay? So the deductive reasoning basically starts from facts which are known. And you logically connect those facts to come up with a conclusion. And the weakness of deductive reasoning is how sure are you that the facts you are using are correct? Okay? So, like the example I was using the other day, this example, all University of Lilongwe students are intelligent people. That's a fact, right? Yeah? As it stands as a statement, it's a fact. But the question is whether it's a correct fact or not. That can be a question. And that's why my colleagues were saying, we are not sure. But I guess we are sure. Should we really say University of Lilongwe students are not intelligent? They are intelligent people. But still that question, which you are asking there, is a question when you are doing science. You should start from a correct fact. So if this is a correct fact, and we had another fact, Mary is a student at University of Lilongwe. It's a fact, right? But the question will still be, is this a correct fact or not? Oh, it's a correct one. This one is correct. But the first one is not correct. We are not sure. But as long as this fact is correct, we are sure of it, and this fact is also correct, we are sure of it, then our conclusion here to say Mary is an intelligent person cannot be contested. But if this fact is questionable, or this fact is questionable, then our conclusion can be questionable as well. So that's where the weakness of deductive reasoning lies. Okay? As long as this fact is correct, that fact is correct, our conclusion would be correct. Of course, let me also warn you, there are times where somebody comes with unconnected facts, and using those unconnected facts makes a conclusion. That's also a problem, right? Here, these two facts are connected. University students are intelligent people. Mary is a university student. There's a connection. Therefore, Mary is an intelligent person. That conclusion cannot be contested. And that's what we're arguing in terms of deductive reasoning. That was a good question, madam. Somebody else with a question? We are happy? Or should I be the one turning around with the questions? You not like my questions. So ask the questions yourselves. Yeah? Oh, arasi wasanka ukhala tuchete. Okay. So this is what I've just said. You must begin with true premises in order to arrive to a correct conclusion. If your premises are not correct, then your conclusion cannot be correct. When you combine the premises and the conclusion, you make what is known as a syllogy. So that's what I'm talking about, syllogism there. But the difficulty of deduction, actually, when he used the word research, and I was saying, what do you mean by research? In research, deduction is used, but it's not only deduction. You have to use both deduction and induction. What he was defining was induction, which is only part of the research process. You cannot complete the process of scientific approach with deductive reasoning because of that question. But deductive reasoning is a powerful tool in coming up with a theory. All the theories you have gone through in your various disciplines of study, somebody did some deduction. A person who conducted a study I'm trying to find a different example because I'm always talking about mammals and mammals. Okay. A person who conducted a study around Lake Chirwam and found that people who are living close to the water tend to suffer from what is this type of disease? Bilharzia. Another person conducts a study in Karonga and finds that since Karonga is an area where there is a lot of water, the incidence of bilharzia is also high. Another person conducts a similar study in Nsanje in areas where there is a lot of water and finds that the incidence of bilharzia is high. Somebody can come up with a deductive reasoning to say, Theodore, in his study, found that people living in areas which have a lot of water tend to suffer from bilharzia in Nsanje. You're always talking about Theodore. Your name? Griffin. Griffin did the studies in Zomba around Lake Shirwa and found that the people who were living around that area, being close to water, tended to suffer from bilharzia. Your name? Maina. Maria. Okay. Maria did a study in Karonga and found that people living in places where there is a lot of water tended to suffer from bilharzia. Then this guy, Gilbert, comes up with a conclusion to say the incidence of bilharzia is common among people who live in waterlogged areas. In Nsanje, there was waterlogging it. Lake Shirwa, there was waterlogging it. Karonga, there was waterlogging. Now, he is connecting these facts. The Nsanje fact, the Lake Shirwa fact, the Karonga fact, and then he's coming up with a conclusion to say people who stay in waterlogged areas tend to have higher incidence of bilharzia. So now, what he has just done is coming up with a theory, a generalization of this. What Maria did was an isolated fact. What Griffin did was an isolated fact. What Theodore did was an isolated fact. But you have to combine these to come up with a parsimonious statement connecting them well. And that statement comes through the process of deductive reasoning. And therefore, the deductive reasoning becomes a very important part of the research process because it is helping you to come up with facts that you can rely on. So deductions help us to generate theory. Deductions help us to generate hypotheses. And the generation of those hypotheses help us to move forward in the research process, to go to the process of induction. Okay? I guess we talked about that thoroughly last week. That because of that weakness of deductive reasoning, we have to have facts which are correct in order to come up with conclusions which are correct. Then in his argument, he was saying, why don't we use things which we have actually observed? Because if we have observed that this is this, then we cannot be challenged it. And if we use those as facts and make our conclusions based on facts which we observed, then there'll be no question about the strength of that knowledge. That's what Francis Bacon is actually trying to argue. We should not tie ourselves to accepting premises handed over by authority as absolute truth. And the last time I was saying, not only authority, experience it is another source of knowledge. Tradition is another source of knowledge. Those sources of knowledge can give us facts. But whether those facts are correct or not is a question. So for Bacon, the facts we should be using should be those based on observed knowledge. Okay? So if you establish your conclusions on the basis of facts generated from observation, then you will be in a better position. So inductive reasoning differs from deductive reasoning because for inductive reasoning, the facts must be known before you can come up with a conclusion. The facts must be known because you have actually observed and nobody can challenge you. If you have measured the height of Charles Masangano and you have found that he is 5 feet 6 inches, nobody can challenge that. Whoever challenges, you can say, okay, take the measuring tape and measure his height. And as long as the measuring tape is a reliable measure for measuring heights, he will come up with the same height. So if you have observed, then you can stand on that fact without wavering. You are sure of what you are talking about. Induction. So the generalizations must come from premises that have been observed. That's the basic difference between deductive reasoning and inductive reasoning. But inductive reasoning has its own weaknesses because in most cases, when you are making observations, it is very hard to observe each and every case in a population. For example, the people who came up with the theory to say all mammals are warm-blooded animals. We know that conclusion came up with from some fact set. They observed lions as mammals, warm-blooded. They observed people as mammals, warm-blooded. They observed elephants as mammals, warm-blooded. Cattle as mammals, warm-blooded. Goats as mammals, warm-blooded. Each and every mammal we have observed is warm-blooded. So all mammals are warm-blooded animals. But the challenge is, if you were to rely on this statement 100% to be true, then you do need to go out in the world, pick any animal species which is a mammal, and all those animals in that species should be measured, and they should be found to be warm-blooded. So take every person in the world, measure them, and you should find that they are all warm-blooded. Then you take all the gods that exist, and the problem is taking people. You know, some of the people lived and died a long time ago. We needed to measure them, all of them, and certify that they are warm-blooded. And there are millions and millions of people who are not yet born. They also need to be measured, and they should be found to be warm-blooded. For us to make a statement, even just if we just limited the issue to human beings, all human beings are warm-blooded animals. It means those who were born and died must be measured. Those who have not yet been born must be measured, and those who are existing today must be measured. For us to say to say that this statement is true cannot be questioned. But who knows? Maybe tomorrow a child will be born somewhere who is cold-blooded, and if that happens, so you can't have perfect induction. That weakens Francis Bacon's argument. Okay? Mafasa simukuyankhaso ndikuti zimene ndikuyankhula zikumveka kapena sizikumveka? Zamveka iti? Okay. Lilipo tusiku zizasinthatu tizaona kuti zimamveka ati kapena ayi, ndezi zimveka ndithu eti. So if you were just to compare in deductive reasoning and inductive reasoning, these two sets of statements I've put here are giving an example. Every mammal is warm-blooded. Goats are mammals, therefore every goat is warm-blooded. Or therefore all goats are warm-blooded. That's what we are saying there. That is deductive reasoning. We are using a fact, every mammal, but you can still question, where is that fact coming from? We are using a fact that goats are mammals, but it must be a correct fact to say goats are mammals. Because if we find a goat bone and it doesn't have a vertebral column, yet it is a goat, then our fact to say goats are mammals will be questioned. But as long as those two statements are correct, then our conclusion here is correct. The difference with what Francis Bacon was saying is every goat that has ever been observed is warm-blooded. Therefore, every goat is warm-blooded. Here the questions are about the facts. Where did these facts come from? Here the facts are reliable, but the question is, not all the goats that ever existed, that will ever exist, that are existing, have been measured. It's only those that have been observed. And we are basing on what has been observed to come up with the conclusion. So that's where the weakness of this lies, and that's where the weakness of that lies. I guess I've said this in a lot of different ways. Now it must make sense. The other weakness of inductive reasoning is that if you were exclusively using inductive reasoning, you would only end up with isolated facts. Theodore's experiment he did in Nsanje, he observed people in Nsanje and incidents of bilharzia in Nsanje. Maria's study in Lake Chirwa is an isolated study of Lake Chirwa. And Griffin's observations in Karonga is an isolated fact about Karonga. If these isolated facts are to make sense, there should be somebody coming in with some level of deduction to connect them to make theory. Am I making sense? I'm not making sense. Every god that has ever been observed is warm-blooded. Now, these gods which were observed, they may have been observed in different places. Okay? Somebody in Brazil studied gods, found them to be warm-blooded. Another person in Japan studied gods. Are you okay, sir? Okay. In Japan, also found that his gods in Japan are warm-blooded. Somebody in Malawi found that his gods in Malawi are warm-blooded. But as long as we leave these facts like that, they are isolated. We are talking about gods in Brazil. That's all we can talk about. Gods in Japan, gods in Malawi. For us to come up with statements which we can refer to as a theory, there must be a way of connecting these isolated facts. So what this statement here is doing is connecting the isolated facts coming from various observations. But to make this statement, you know what? We have used the deductive reasoning yet. We have deduced that from the observed facts. So in coming up with this statement, we have actually combined deductive reasoning and inductive reasoning. So we are saying that in the scientific approach, you have to combine deductive reasoning and inductive reasoning to come up with reliable facts, to come up with theory, to come up with generalizations. Even hypotheses are based on the same. Actually, to give an example for hypothesis here. Name. Hey. Sindi kuva tundulepe. Rayon. Okay. Lion. Rayon. Okay. Makanika kuva. Rayon conducted his study in Brazil. That's where he found his gods to be warm-blooded. Yamikan conducted his study in Japan, and he found that his gods were warm-blooded. Mona conducted her study in Chitipa and found that her gods are warm-blooded. So, despite that, these people have done these studies in isolation, but we can connect to come up with that statement. to come up with a hypothesis. Yes, sir. Name.
Eric.
Eric. Eric has a question to say, I'm also studying gods, but my gods are not in Brazil, they are not in Japan, they are not in Chitipa, they are in Mozambique. Should I say that the gods I'm going to study are going to be warm-blooded? He is not sure. We can only be sure after we have measured the weight. But based on the facts from Yamikan, Mona, and Ryan, I'm damaging his name. Rayon. Based on the facts that these three have provided, he can hypothesize to say, my gods in Mozambique are warm-blooded. He's making that statement based on the findings of these three heads, which means that he's making the statement using deductive reasoning, connecting these facts. And he's making a leap beyond the deduction he is making to say that now gods in Mozambique are warm-blooded. So you can argue to say the gods in Mozambique are warm-blooded, and I'm going to test to confirm whether indeed they are warm-blooded. So when we say that a hypothesis is a statement assumed to be true, but needing to be confirmed true, that's how that comes from. You must come from facts which are known, and you're making a jump to something which is not known, but in a connection with what is already known. And that's why the process of deductive reasoning is strong, because without him connecting the facts between Rayon, Yamikan, and Mona, he could not come up with a hypothesis. He has to use the deduction to come up with this conclusion, and use this conclusion to make a jump beyond to talk about his specific situation. Is it making sense? Okay. When I'm giving these examples here, in Oyotu, when you will be writing your research proposals, research reports, you will be expected to demonstrate your ability to come up with deductions which cannot be questioned yet. When you are reading the literature, the empirical findings in the literature should help you to come up with deductions that should lead into your hypothesis, that should lead into your problem statements and the like. That's why I'm spending this time that we do that. In whatever I've said, I put a caution to say that it's possible to find somebody coming up with statements which are not logically connected and then making a conclusion. Then you should say, Chimwene, my conclusion. You should get about it. Okay? You must demonstrate that your premises are logically connected for you to come up with a logical conclusion. Even in this case, The observations must be logically connected in order for you to come up with a logical conclusion. I think I've already talked about this. I've just finished talking about the hypothesis. Any question about hypothesis? Maona pamene imachokera induction, maona pamene imachokera deduction to come up with the hypothesis. Maona how that we combine the induction and the deduction to make a scientific approach. I must say that this process must be systematic. I'm just saying what I've already said in a different way. Logical connection of your arguments. That must be demonstrated. Okay? And those logical connections normally start with the definition of a problem. What is a problem? What is a research problem? Research problem. Yes, madam, in yellow. What is a research problem? You can borrow her. You can't borrow her. No, Rayon is a very bright person in this class. He's going to borrow her for sure. Okay, Yamikan is going to borrow her. What is a research problem? Pajazina Jarimatinda? Shalom Matuza. Research problem. We are saying scientific approach should start with the definition of a problem. Wait, what do we mean by the problem?
Something we don't know.
Yeah, shout so that the guy at the corner should know.
Something we don't know of.
Something which is not known, knowledge gap. Okay? We have said this to you in several ways. We should be able to define the gap in knowledge in the process of doing scientific approach. In the process of doing research, it starts with a definition of a problem. Now, you can go back to what I was talking about earlier on it. You remember I gave you the steps of in doing applied research, where I talked about this title, I talked about introduction, I talked about background, and then the problem. So you could say, amasangano so ndemuti sokoleza. So mnayamba ndi title. Ndipo namukuti tiziyabira problem. But actually, for you to come up with a good research title, it has to start from the problem. You remember we talked about two types of problems? She has given us one type of problem. What is the other type of problem? Yes, development problems. Although Mr. Theodore was also not sure and he was not shouting enough that the other people should hear, but it's correct. We have development problems, we have research problems. If I went back to my example about uh, Bilharzia. Do we like to have Bilharzia in our communities? Do we want to be seeing Bilharzia in our communities? No. So the moment we discover people in Sanja are suffering from Bilharzia, this is a problem. If we discover people around Lake Chiwa are suffering from Bilharzia, it's a problem. We don't want that. Karonga, they're having Bilharzia, it's a problem. We don't want that. But now the question is, if we don't want it, we need to eradicate it. How do we eradicate it? Do we know how to do it? If we don't know how to eradicate it, then there is a knowledge gap. Wait. And that knowledge gap is now a research problem. And now you can start from there as a scientist, say, okay, definitely we want Bilharzia to be eradicated in Malawi. But for us to achieve what we want to achieve, to have a Bilharzia free population in Malawi, we need to know how to do it. Unfortunately, we don't have the knowledge on how to eradicate Bilharzia. So my research is going to deal with the problem of addressing this knowledge gap. Because even if you may have 1 million people interested to eradicating Bilharzia, if we don't know how to do it, those 1 million people will not do anything. Okay? But if we have the knowledge, you can now send out these 1 million people, say, okay, this is how to eradicate it. So some of you go to Sanje, some of you go to Zomba, some of you go to Karonga, and help the people there to eradicate. We don't want to hear any story about behavior anymore in Malawi. So you've got to come up with a clear problem statement. That will be your starting point. And if you have come up with that problem statement, will it be difficult for you to come up with a title of your study? Because the title is going to come from what you are going to do. And what you are going to do is to generate knowledge about eradication of Bilharzia in Malawi. So investigating methods for eradicating Bilharzia, or you can even just say methods for eradicating Bilharzia, because when you come up with the study and you tell us that, oh, if you want to eradicate Bilharzia, I have done studies and I have found that the methods for eradicating Bilharzia are 1, 2, 3. Then your title can even just say methods for eradicating Bilharzia. Mwaona nkhani pamene kuti ifike kuti title iveke bwino mwachokera kuti problem. That's why I'm saying that's the starting point of all research. Yes, sir.
I just wanted to comment a little bit
Yeah.
before I go outside. So I was really interested to just weigh in the old days of being in class. So I think the subject that we are studying now about the deductive and deductive way of reasoning, they have really practical implications in research process, because sometimes it becomes difficult for us to imagine what we are studying and how we are going to use the knowledge we are studying in a research project. But I feel the way it has been explained and the way of, I think, wrap up the discussion on deductive and deductive has made me to think about the application of these two processes of generating knowledge. So I'll just say that in some cases we we usually respond in information and then we expect to vomit this information afterwards. But I think we can see, we can start to think of what we are studying and how these things, at the same moment, will help us to advance our understanding about the research process. So one comment that I wanted to here emphasize is how deductive reasoning is really important in the scientific research. For example, research is an art of science. So I found that deductive because it deals with facts or theories most of the times. And then when you are reading, for example, articles, it helps you to generate an understanding of the particular problem. So, for example, I'm studying about, let's say, agriculture development. Maybe it might be maybe the use of new technology. Before even I go to observe, which will give me observable knowledge, I have really to study the current or existing knowledge, and this knowledge now gives me like what should I study or what's really the problem. Because sometimes you think like when you are doing research, you are trying to solve a problem, but some people have already solved the problem. You are just repeating or copying something and pasting. But once you have read a number of articles, it gives you now like logic reasoning of the problem that you want to deal with in the research. Rather than maybe starting from the top, thinking of the title. Of course, that have an idea of what you want to study. But I think when you start with the deductive reasoning, it helps you to generate gaps or to identify some issues that are really important in this life. So I'll just maybe recommend and also maybe ask maybe like because I see this as my friends or maybe I'm serving as a lecturer, but I see this as my friends. I have noticed that when you're studying this, sometimes our level of concentration and attention maybe it's difficult. But once you start doing the research, is when you realize that you really wanted to understand these things. So maybe at some point you need to be clear of what you are doing and also be sure of the discipline of the classroom.
The last statement you are making is a dangerous one. Dangerous in that we are all going to reach that point. And we have to deal with what he is saying. Very soon after this class is done, when we come back, we shall find the Bob, Dean of Students, contacting us saying, give me research topics. He's going to do it very soon. Now, you'll be guessing, where do I come up with a research topic? How do I come up with a research topic? But what we have said should give you leads. And in what he has said, he has mentioned something. Of course, he has gone ahead of me by mentioning the process of reading other research articles to come up with facts that will help you to ask the right questions, to come up with the right problems. Asking the right questions, I'm saying coming up with the right problems. Because if you have a gap, it's a question, eh? We have this behavior in all these places. We want to eradicate it. But how can we eradicate it? We are talking about needing knowledge on how to. So this is a question. But that question is the problem. Okay? So yeah, what he has said is 100% correct. And that's why I spend time talking about these things, because we are going to meet them very soon. So when Bob says, come up with research topics, don't just guess. Remember what we have talked about. What we are talking about today in this class, in fact, not today only, what we'll be talking about in this class is not only for passing exams. It is going to be useful for the rest of our life. When I was coming out of my office to this class, I found your colleagues jumping around with their gowns, but nobody, without doing this, will put on that gown. So it's very important. Now, thanks very much for your comments, sir. Maybe it's a good point to stretch our legs as well. You should say. So she can sign for your check, and get all the money from your account. Mwaswera. Taswera. Imene. Hey. Angopumisa kaya kuti The second step is coming up with a hypothesis, research questions, or research objectives. That will be the next step in your scientific approach. So first you want to come up with a problem statement, and from there come up with a hypothesis, or come up with a research objectives, or come up with research questions. We have observed the bilharzia in a number of districts in Malawi. We don't want to have bilharzia and we need to eradicate it. But what do we do in order to eradicate bilharzia? How can we eradicate bilharzia is our research problem. Wait. Following that research problem is for us to come up with a hypothesis or research objectives. Now, to come up with a hypothesis, the example I gave you, right? If studies in the Republic of China, where they